So first thing I want to do today is give you all some additional resources or just some names and dates. I will send this out in an email as well. I found this podcast. I only found it yesterday. It's great. It has it's got a playlist for a bunch of different books of the Bible. It's got one on Romans, on Deuteronomy, on the book of the 12, like the 12 minor prophets, on Job, and on Matthew, and on Revelation. The one on Matthew is really good. So it's like an hour-long episode that covers, Matthew 1 and 2. And it's the guys that are talking, and they bring in a premier Matthean scholar. So the reason that I know that it's really good is that it has both Jonathan Pennington and AJ Levine in the same playlist, in the same podcast. So AJ is the one that I reference as my New Testament professor while I was here at Vanderbilt. So she is a Jewish feminist New Testament scholar who is excellent on the stuff that she does. Pennington here was my New Testament PhD supervisor at Southern. And so he's got a book on the Sermon on the Mount, as well as like general Gospels stuff. I think his dissertation was on Matthew. But I mean, think of like the different spectrum that these two are a part of, right? Like a Southern Baptist professor, and then a Jewish feminist scholar, right? Kind of different realms of scholarship, but because they're both the head of their field in a very specific area of Matthew, they're both in this podcast. So I think Pennington does the Sermon on the Mount episode, so like the Matthew 5-7. I think AJ does like chapters 20 to 22 or something like that. And then I wanted to give you guys these names. These are all very good Matthew scholars. So if you see something written by any of them while you are looking for stuff on Matthew, it's gold and you should read it. Right. I think a lot of us struggle with like, oh, there's this thing. It might be good. I have no idea who the person is that wrote this. And then you have to read halfway through the article to realize, oh, it's not good. Right. If you see one of these names, go for it. Right. All of them are great. And if you have a chance to like listen to lectures of theirs or read books or articles of theirs, they're all going to be very helpful. I will remember to send out an email about this as well as the other stuff we talked about, so that you all can have the link to the podcast in front of you, so you don't have to like write this down and Google it. Good. Okay. So let's go through and just start with Matthew 1. So did we all bring our like physical copies of our Bibles? Okay. Let's just start at the very beginning. An account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Okay. So I just want to stop here and look at this. Does anybody have a different word for genealogy in verse 1? No? Okay. That's good. That's helpful. The Greek word is, anybody see what the word is? Close. Right? I mean, the word is Genesis. The beginnings, the startings. So like a first century Jew who's hearing this would interpret this as the Genesis of Jesus. Like whatever word they call the first book of their Bible, Genesis, genealogy, generations, whatever word they call it, it's the same word here. So you're going to have implications. You're going to automatically trigger thoughts of the beginning of the Torah. Okay? Do you all have Jesus the Christ or Jesus the Messiah? Okay. It's the same word. I think we all know that, right? Christ is the Greek word for anointed one. Messiah is the Hebrew word for anointed one. They're both just titles. Okay. And then we have son of David, son of Abraham. So let's talk about this for a second. Because it gives us the genealogy to go from Abraham to David to Babylon to Jesus, we tend to think the son of David, son of Abraham, is just a summary of the genealogy he's about to give us, right? Anybody think this way? Of just, oh, son of Abraham, son of David, he's connecting us to the people he's going to connect us to. This is the point of why it's here. Let's think about two other reasons this is important. First, what is the importance of David in Jewish history? Yes, he's the king. That's the importance, the singular word king. And so, yes, it's not just a messianic claim, it's a Davidic royal kingship claim. Okay? Second, what's the importance of Abraham in Jewish history? If we're going to give David the singular word king, what word can we give to Abraham? Father's good. Anything else? Maybe promise, right? God gave all these promises to Abraham. And I think the immediate implication in connecting Jesus to him would be fulfillment of promises, right? I also want to think about it in one further way, which might not be immediately clear now, but I think will pay off later. He's called Son of David and Son of Abraham. Let's think about this. Who is the literal son of David? Solomon. Good. Who is the literal son of Abraham? Isaac. What connection does Jesus have to Solomon and Isaac? Maybe the implication would be for like Isaac is the promised son who, when he arrives on the scene, what is it that Abraham has to do with Isaac? Sacrifice. Isaac comes on the scene and has to be sacrificed in order to receive the promises. Immediately, this is still verse 1, maybe Matthew is cluing us in on where we're going. If Jesus is connected to the son of Abraham, maybe it doesn't mean like the ancient descendant of Abraham. Maybe it means a new Isaac, right? Solomon, you all might not be familiar with this as much. We know about Solomon as being very wise and like a good wise king at the start and then not so much at the end. By the time Jesus is on the scene in Second Temple Judaism, Solomon is considered a miracle worker. Not just like wise in his profession, but that he can perform healings and miracles and all this sort of stuff because of like the anointing and power that God gives him. So he can lay hands on people and heal them. He can cure the blind and raise paralytics and all this sort of stuff. So there's this great scene. I don't even remember which gospel it's in, if it's in John or Luke, or maybe it's somewhere here in Matthew, where there's blind beggars who call out and say, Son of David, have mercy on us. I think in that story in particular, they really are calling on, hey, you know how the son of David had miraculous power to heal blind people? Why don't you, son of David, come and heal us in the same Solomonic power that existed before? As a wise, beneficent, healing, miracle-working king. Does this make sense? Has anybody read The Lord of the Rings? Like the actual books, not the movies. So in The Return of the King, if you've seen them, I'm sure you've seen the movies, right? In The Return of the King, after the scene where like Aragorn shows up with all the dead people and they rout Pelargir and get rid of all the bad guys, and they have now taken over Gondor, and Aragorn is the steward is gone, and Aragorn can probably like properly declare himself as king. He doesn't in the books openly at first, because he wants to do everything the right way and he wants to be invited in and all this sort of stuff. But there is a rumor, a myth going around in the city, and has been around. It's like an old wives' tale. The hands of a king are the hands of a healer. And so Aragorn goes into the city, into the houses of healing, while he's still in secret. He's not like openly declaring himself as king. He sneaks into the city and heals the people who are in the houses of healing, who have been sickened by like the black sickness or whatever they call it, because the Nazgul are flying around and making everybody terrified and sick. Mary is sick, and what's her name? Eowyn is sick, and Faramir is sick. And Aragorn can go and use his little Athelas stuff that he used to heal Frodo in the first movie, and he can heal these people. The only reason he knows how to do that is because of his royal lineage that has taught him how to do these things. Nobody else knows how to do it except Aragorn. Tolkien does that because he's tapping into these ideas of a beneficent king, a wise ruler who is also capable of healing. Not just like a military strategist, not just a kind and just person, but a healer, a miracle worker. Maybe Matthew is also cluing us into this. That in the same way that Solomon is performing these miracles as king, Jesus is going to be doing the same thing. Maybe. Good? Okay. I talked in the video, the last video, about the genealogy writ large. I think the things that I pointed out are the women that come up in the genealogy. You've got Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and the wife of Uriah. It doesn't even name Bathsheba. And then at the end, Mary. And we talked in the video about why that is, why those women in particular, why they're here, and kind of what Matthew might be trying to draw out of that. And we also talked about the generations. Matthew is counting the generations here, which is important. This is in Hebrew. I don't know that we've talked about gematria. It's like ancient numerology, if you're familiar with this. Taylor Swift talks about numerology a lot, right? She's 13 and Travis Kelce is 87. And so together they're 100. And that means they're meant to be, right? Using numbers to create meaning. People do this. In the genealogies, scholars will point to the name David is 14 in this, like, in the gematria system of counting. And so maybe that's why Matthew is forcing the generations to make it 14 and 14 and 14. Because he wants it to be David, David, David. We don't really know. It is very clear that he's forcing the numbers. He skips several generations. He names one person as the father of another person when really there's like 100 years between them. This is very common. It's not like Matthew is doing something that's uncommon or he's lying to you. You skip generations of schmucks if you need to, right? Guys who don't amount to much don't get included in the genealogies. They just skip right over them. But for Matthew, for some reason, it's important to get to 14. And there's a lot of debate about why it's important. Does anybody take issue with he's doing all of this genealogy, and then who does the genealogy actually come down to? Who is the genealogy really tracing the ancestry of? Who is it really, though, biologically? It's not Jesus the Messiah. It's Joseph, right? Yeah, but it's not really the father, right? And I think this is a struggle for some people to say, okay, but you're giving us the genealogy, but it's the genealogy of Joseph, who you're just about to tell us is not the biological father, right? And so people take issue with this primarily because we think of genealogies as primarily interested in genes, biological transmission of genetic information. And that is not what ancient genealogies are interested in, right? Your adopted son is properly placed as your inheritor in your genealogy, even though they have no genetic connection to you. They are the legal descendant, and that is equally as important. The genes don't really matter as much as we think of your biological child being important to pass on your genetic material. Go ahead. There's a lot of debate about what's going on with Joseph, particularly debate between Catholics and Protestants. But the point here is Joseph does decide to marry Mary. They do end up getting married, which makes Jesus his legal heir. And because of that, Jesus does fit into the genealogy under Joseph, even though he's not, we say, biologically related to Joseph. I think we talked about this in theology of like, whose genetics does Jesus have? Like biologically, who does he share DNA with? And it really can go any way, because obviously the Bible doesn't care about this because the Bible has no idea what DNA is. I think most of us are under the assumption that Jesus has Mary's DNA and then also maybe like miraculous DNA supplied by the Holy Spirit. I think that's how most of us conceive of it. There are debates, though. It could be that God miraculously uses Mary's DNA alone to produce a clone of Mary that's Jesus. It could also be that Jesus doesn't have any DNA at all from Mary, that she's a surrogate, and that all of the DNA comes from heaven. And she is just the willing surrogate of this divine baby. I think we don't like that as much because how can he be human if he's just like a God baby inside her belly that doesn't have any human DNA, right? You could also go the other extreme and say it's Joseph's DNA, that God miraculously provides Joseph's DNA without them actually having intercourse. You could make that argument as well, that Jesus is fully Joseph and Mary's biological child, and the miracle is that happened without procreation. That happened without them consummating their marriage. Again, the Bible does not care about this. This is just like a fun thing that, theologians like to debate. But it's very much up for debate. And it has implications about Jesus being fully God and fully man. Good on this? I also want to take a second to talk about this, the proto-evangelium of James. Have we talked about this in class before? So the word is proto-evangelium. You can see here in evangelium, that's the word for gospel. So it's like a proto-gospel. It comes out in the 2nd century. It's not considered canonical by anybody. It's not considered authoritative, but this is where Catholics get a lot of their Mariology, their views on Mary. So the reason I bring it up is because it is another infancy narrative, a story about Jesus's birth. In the Proto-Evangelium of James, the specific thing that I wanted to point out is that Mary is with child. Joseph decides to marry her anyway. And there's a lot more stretch about what's going on here. The Proto-Evangelium is the one that says Joseph has children from a previous marriage and is widowed, and then is given Mary to take care of him as like essentially a temple virgin. They're on their way to Bethlehem. She goes into labor, and he kind of like stashes her in a cave. And Joseph runs ahead to Bethlehem to find a midwife to help deliver the baby. He finds a midwife named Salome, and he says, "Hey, I need some help." And she says, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he says, "My virgin betrothed is about to give birth." And she says, "Good one. That's funny." And he says, "No, really, she's a virgin and we're engaged and she's about to give birth." And Salome kind of says like, "Well, first of all, I don't believe you. And then sure, I'll come and help." And she essentially makes some claim that says, obviously, I'm not going to believe that she's a virgin, because how could she be if she's pregnant? This is dumb. And so she goes to the cave, and in the story, Salome is in the cave with Mary, and a bright light shines and blinds Salome so she can't see anything. And then she like essentially hears the baby crying, and the light fades, and Mary is holding Jesus at breast, right? Nursing Jesus. Jesus is not born vaginally, right? Jesus kind of like comes out of her belly and just kind of like I don't even know, osmosises through her belly and is being held by Mary. Salome does not participate in the birth, does not like pull Jesus out, nothing. And so she goes and tells Joseph, "Hey, baby's born, good to go. By the way, I still don't believe what you're saying." And Joseph says, "No, I'm telling you, like I swear to God that she was a virgin." And Salome essentially says, "Unless I inspect her hymen, I will not believe you." And Joseph says, "Okay, then go do it." So Salome goes back into the cave, and the text is explicit. She reaches inside to ensure that Mary's hymen is still intact. So she does a physical examination and ensures that Mary is still a virgin, which confirms two things. One, Mary has not had sex in order to have this child in her belly. And two, the baby did not exit vaginally. The baby came out of her some other way, because obviously that would also break her hymen, right? If you could somehow be impregnated without breaking your hymen, having a child would break your hymen, right? So, and then she says, "Oh, praise God." I think there's some story about like after she does the physical examination, her hand withers because she doubted God. So her hand starts to like burn off and wither. And then an angel comes and says, "The baby will heal you. Go and hold the baby." So she like takes the baby from Mary and holds the baby, and then her hand is restored. All of that is explicitly interested in Mary's virginity being intact, right? And all of this develops long. So in Catholicism, Mary remains a virgin, I mean, to this day, right? She doesn't have any children. She never consummates her marriage with Joseph. The text does not tell us that. We'll look at the text to see. But this is floating around very quickly within Christianity. This is like early 2nd century where they have these ideas developed. Does anybody have any questions on this? Why is it not inspired? I think because it is not written by who it says it's written by. It's not actually written by James, at least the James that it claims to be written by. And it is late. I mean, it's like 150. So everything in the New Testament has been written and expanded and sent out. And so it nobody really gets it and considers it inspired. It's not really part of the debate, but it is largely influential. And I mean, to this day, Catholics still use a lot of this stuff for their Mariology. The idea that Mary is a perpetual virgin, the idea that Mary never consummated her marriage with Joseph, the idea that she never had any other children, that she, for Catholics, Mary never died. Mary was assumed into heaven, kind of like the chariots of fire you see with Elijah. And she is still, to this day, a virgin in heaven, hanging out next to Jesus. And this all kind of starts here with the Proto-Evangelium. I bring this up as a contrast for what we actually see with our text, okay? So there's all this stuff that's floating around. What does our text actually tell us? It actually tells us, and this is starting in 18, the birth of Jesus took place in this way. Mary was engaged to Joseph, but they had not lived together. She was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Uh-oh. Right? This is a big yikes if you're Joseph, right? Your virginal fiance is now pregnant. And she says, "I swear I didn't do anything." I mean, what is Joseph going to think? Obviously, Joseph does not believe her. And it says that he's a righteous man. He doesn't want to expose her to public disgrace. He could. He could take her before a tribunal and say, "She's a virgin," or "I'm a virgin," right? "We have not consummated our marriage, and she's pregnant." He should do that, because what's the implication if he does choose to marry her? That it's his baby and that they were having sex outside of wedlock, right? To use the terms we use today. By marrying her, he assumes some of the shame, some of the guilt. He takes it upon himself, even though he knows that he's innocent. And he could publicly shame her. He doesn't want to do that to her. You could read this romantically because he loves her so much, he doesn't want to. Or it's because of this, righteousness that he is demonstrating. Okay. When he planned to divorce her quietly, an angel comes and says, "Don't do that." She's telling the truth. She didn't have sex with anybody, right? That's essentially what the angel comes and tells her. How is it that the angel communicates with Joseph? In a dream. And I'm sure we've talked about this. If you're told that there's a man named Joseph who's dreaming dreams, who are you automatically supposed to think of? Joseph from Genesis, 37? Joseph's dreams. And where do those dreams take Joseph? Because he dreams the dreams, where do his brothers sell him off to? Into Egypt. Joseph's dreams here also lead him to Egypt. Right? So you've got a guy named Joseph who's dreaming prophetic dreams that land him in Egypt. Very similar story, right? Intentionally so. Matthew did not have to tell you that the mode of communication was dreams. Angels come and talk to Mary, and it's not in dreams. But he specifically says dreams. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in Matthew 1 and 2 that Joseph is receiving this in dreams. It's important. He has this dream. She'll bear a son, name him Jesus. He'll save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what was spoken. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. There's this whole thing of, there's a lot of debate about this, which I'm sure you all are probably familiar with. In 123, in Hebrew, the word from this text in Isaiah is Alma, which pretty much means like a young woman. And it's translated into the Septuagint as Parthenos, which does have a more technical term of virginity. Think of the word like maid or a maiden in our English. That can mean both a young woman, but also maybe a virgin young woman. The implication being young women are virgins, right? There is argument to say the text in Isaiah did not mean that the woman in the text was a virgin. She was a young woman having a child, which is normal. Young women get married and have children in ancient Judea all the time. The Septuagint chooses this word Parthenos, which has more of a virginal connotation. It can be used the same way as a young woman, but has more of a technical sense of virgin. And the argument that scholars will make now is essentially Matthew saw this verse in the Old Testament in Isaiah and came up with a story about Mary being a virgin in order to give us another fulfillment text. I don't know that any evangelical scholars get on board with this to say that it's just made up whole cloth. I think it's more likely that it's the opposite. There is question about Jesus's genealogy. There's question about his birth. And Matthew is using this verse from Isaiah as another one of those proof texts to try to help it be better, help it not be as problematic for you, the audience, that Jesus's parentage is in question. I think we talked about this last week. In Luke, the questions about Jesus' parentage are explicit. Is this Joseph's son? Right? The implication being, we all know he isn't. We all know that Mary was sleeping around 30 years ago, and everybody knows that Joseph is not the father of the baby. Right? Because there's this questionable parentage. So Matthew might be trying to alleviate that. Everybody now just is on board with, yeah, it's a virginal conception, because the rest of Matthew talks about, how can I be pregnant if I haven't, consummated my marriage yet? And then Matthew explicitly tells us, the baby will be conceived by the Holy Spirit. Good on this? There's also this issue of the angel says, name him Jesus, which is Yeshua. You all are familiar with this? The name Jesus suggests a transliteration. Who else is named Yeshua in the Old Testament? Yes. So Jesus and Joshua have the same name, right? We just call Jesus a different name to make it clear and to be so that he's the only one who has that name. Okay. There's also this discrepancy between like the Isaiah text that Matthew quotes says he will be called Emmanuel. And then when Jesus is born, they do not name him Emmanuel. They name him Jesus, which is not the same thing. Jesus means like God will save us, and Emmanuel means God is with us. Right? So it's a different name, and so it's unclear why Matthew would tell us, "Oh, the Messiah is going to be named Emmanuel," and then very clearly does not have any intention of naming him that. It's just a I don't know. I don't want to say it's a discrepancy because Matthew does not see it as a discrepancy at all. Matthew could have left that part of the verse off and just said, "The virgin shall conceive and bear a son." But he intended to include the word Emmanuel because God being with us is just as important as God saving us. God is saving us through him being with us. Go ahead. Yeah, and I'm sure there's this idea of because I mean, like Christmas songs, we sing that, right? Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us. Um, that is certainly possible, and I don't know that in Isaiah, they're certainly not thinking that this child that's going to be conceived is a divine child, the literal Son of God, in the way that we think of as Christ. They're not thinking in these terms at all because they're strictly monotheistic and they have no idea that that God exists as a Trinity and one of the members of the Trinity is going to become incarnate. Isaiah has no concept of this. And so it is very unclear. Maybe the rescuer that's coming is going to represent God so clearly that we will say God is now with us through the actions of this human individual. Matthew is tapping into that to say Jesus being with us is the same thing as God being with us. And in his being with us, he's going to save us. That's why he's named Jesus. Okay. It says in verse 25, they had no marital relations, Joseph and Mary, until she had a son. And he named him, Joseph named Jesus. The implication here in verse 25 is that they did have relations after Jesus was born. They did actually get married. I think we would argue that Joseph and Mary end up getting married before Jesus is born. I'm not sure. Let's see. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, took Mary as his wife, but they didn't have relations until she bore the son. So it seems like they got engaged. She got pregnant. The angel tells him it's okay. You can get married anyway. They do get married. And then Mary has the child. And then it seems like they move forward and they have their honeymoon, right? They consummate their marriage and have other children. That seems like what the text is telling us. Catholics will disagree with that, right? And so that is purely a debate based on things outside of the text. The text does not tell us at all that that's what's happening. Okay? Good on this?